The space around Jake Morrison's ship was quiet and dark. Too quiet. He had been flying alone for 3 days, checking the outer edges of the solar system for any signs of trouble. His small ship was built for scouting, not fighting, and right now that seemed like a very bad thing. Jake looked at his screens and saw them coming. 5 gray ships, each one bigger than a city block, moving toward him like hungry sharks. He had heard stories about these ships from other pilots who barely escaped. The aliens inside were called Zephyrians, and they had been taking over star systems one by one. His radio crackled with static, then a voice spoke in perfect English. The voice was cold and flat like it came from a machine. "Human ship, you will stop your engines now. Do not try to run. Your ship is already damaged." Jake looked at his control panel. Half the lights were red and smoke was coming from somewhere, behind him. The aliens were right. His ship was dying and he was millions of miles from the nearest help. "This is Captain Jake Morrison," he said into his microphone. "I'm with the Earth Defense Corps. You have no right to stop me." The voice laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Your laws mean nothing out here, human. We are coming aboard your ship now." Jake tried to start his weapons, but nothing happened. He tried to turn his ship around to run, but the engines were dead. A beam of light shot out from the biggest alien ship and grabbed his vessel like a giant hand. He felt his ship being pulled forward, and there was nothing he could do to stop. And the inside of the alien ship was huge. Jake's little scout ship looked like a toy as they pulled it into a massive bay. He could see dozens of other ships sitting there in the darkness. Some were human ships like his. Others were strange shapes he didn't recognize. All of them looked empty and abandoned. The bay doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder. Jake heard air being pumped in around his ship, then footsteps on the metal hull above his head. The door to his ship was torn off like paper, and they came for him. The first thing Jake noticed about the Zephyrians was how tall they were. Each one was at least 7 feet high with long, thin arms and legs. Their skin was gray and seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. Their heads were too big for their bodies, and they had black eyes that never seemed to blink. Lots of eyes, not just 2 like humans. Jake reached for his gun, but suddenly he couldn't move. His hand stopped halfway to his belt, and his whole body went stiff. He could still breathe and think, but his muscles wouldn't obey him anymore. One of the aliens stepped forward. When it spoke, Jake didn't hear the words with his ears. Instead, the voice appeared right inside his head. "Don't fight us, human. We control your body now. You cannot hurt us and you cannot hurt yourself." They picked him up like he weighed nothing and carried him through the ship. The hallways were strange, with walls that curved and twisted like they were inside some living thing. Lights moved along the ceiling above them, following their path through the maze of corridors. They brought him to a room where another alien was waiting. This one was different from the others. It had more scars on its gray skin, and its many eyes seemed older and meaner. When it looked at Jake, he felt like it was reading his thoughts. "I am Commander Veltar," the alien said in his mind. "I have broken the spirits of 16 different species. You will be the 17th. Jake found that he could speak again. "What do you want from me?" "We want nothing from you personally," Veltar replied. "You are just a tool we will use. We will break your mind until you beg us to stop. Then we will record your crying and send it to your people. When they see their strongest warrior begging like a child, they will give up without a fight." "You don't understand humans," Jake said, trying to keep his voice strong. Veltar made that cold, laughing sound again. "We understand you perfectly. We have been watching your species for months. You are social animals who need to be around others. You fear being alone more than anything else. We will put you in complete isolation, and within a few weeks you will lose your mind." They took away his uniform and all his equipment. Jake was left wearing only a simple gray shirt and pants. Then they led him to another room that made his heart sink. It was a perfect white cube. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all the same bright white color. There were no windows, no pictures, no furniture except for a small slot in one wall. The room was just big enough for him to lie down in any direction, but not much bigger. "This will be your home," Veltar said in his mind. No sound will reach you here. The light will never change. No one will speak to you or see you. You will have only your own thoughts, and those thoughts will drive you insane. Jake stepped into the white cube. The door closed behind him with barely a whisper, and then he was alone. The silence hit him like a physical blow. Jake had never heard silence like this before. Even in the quietest places on Earth, there was always something. Wind in the trees, distant cars, the hum of air conditioning. Here there was absolutely nothing. He could hear his own heartbeat and breathing, but that was all. He walked around the room, examining every inch of it. The walls were completely smooth, made of some material he had never seen before. There were no cracks, no seams, no way to tell where one wall ended and another began. The ceiling was just high enough that he couldn't touch it even when he jumped. Jake sat down in the middle of the floor and tried to think clearly. The aliens expected him to go crazy from being alone. They wanted to use his breakdown to scare all of humanity into giving up. He couldn't let that happen. He remembered his training at the military academy. The instructors had taught them about surviving as prisoners. They said the most important thing was to keep your mind active and never give up hope. The body could be imprisoned, but the mind could stay free if you worked at it. Jake closed his eyes and started breathing slowly and deeply. It was something he had learned in basic training, a way to stay calm under pressure. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, out through the mouth for 4 counts. The rhythm helped him focus. Time became meaningless in the white cube. Jake had no way to tell if minutes or hours were passing. The light never changed, and there were no sounds to mark the passing of time. 3 times the slot in the wall opened and delivered food, tasteless blocks of protein, and a cup of water. Jake ate them without really tasting anything. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the uncomfortable floor. It was the boredom. Jake had always been active, always had things to do and people to talk to. Now he had nothing but white walls and his own mind. But instead of fighting the boredom, Jake decided to use it. He began to explore his own memory like he was reading a book. He remembered conversations he had with his parents when he was a child. He recalled every detail of his first day at the academy. He thought about friends he hadn't seen in years. Jake discovered that his memory was much better than he had ever known. He could remember exact words people had said to him years ago. He could picture their faces perfectly, remember what they were wearing, even remember what the weather was like that day. He started using these memories to entertain himself. He would replay his favorite moments like movies in his head. He remembered the day he graduated from flight school, the first time he saw Earth from space, the look on his sister's face when he came home on leave. Hidden cameras watched Jake from secret places in the walls. The Zephyrians expected to see him pacing like a caged animal, talking to himself, showing the first signs of madness. Instead, they saw something that confused them. Jake Morrison sat calmly in the center of his white prison. His breathing was steady, his face was peaceful, and he showed no signs of panic or fear. This was not what was supposed to happen. Veltar watched the monitors with growing concern. Every other species had started breaking down within the first few days. The humans were supposed to be even weaker than most, but this one seemed almost comfortable in his isolation. For the first time in his long career, Commander Veltar began to wonder if he had made a mistake. This human was different from anything he had encountered before, and that difference might be more dangerous than he realized. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison entered the White Cube. At least that's what the Zephyrians counted on their time measurements. Jake had no way of knowing how long it had been. Days and nights meant nothing in his bright white prison, where the light never changed. Commander Veltar stood in the monitoring room, staring at the screens that showed Jake's every movement. This was not going according to plan. By now, the human should have been a broken mess, crying and begging to be let out. Instead, Jake seemed more peaceful than when he had first arrived. "This makes no sense," Veltar said to his assistant, a younger Zephyrian named Kixtal. "Look at him. He should be insane by now." On the screen, Jake was doing something that looked like exercise. He was lying on his back, lifting his legs up and down in a steady rhythm. His breathing was controlled and even. There was no sign of panic or madness in his movements. Perhaps this human is defective, Kixtal suggested. Maybe his mind was already broken before we captured him. Veltar shook his head, his multiple eyes never leaving the monitor. No, I examined his mind when we first brought him aboard. He was completely normal for his species, strong-willed but normal. What they were watching was indeed strange. Jake had created a routine for himself inside the cube. He would wake up, do exercises for what seemed like an hour, eat his food, when it appeared, then sit quietly for long periods with his eyes closed. Sometimes he would walk around the small space, but always in the same pattern. Jake had learned to measure time by his own body. His heartbeat became his clock, his breathing his calendar. He counted meals to mark the passing of days. 3 meals equaled 1 day in his mind, though he had no idea if this matched real time. The exercise routine had started simple: push-ups, sit-ups, stretching. But as weeks passed, Jake had made it more complex. He used the walls to do different kinds of push-ups. He created yoga poses using the small space. He even learned to do handstands against the wall. But the physical exercise was just part of what Jake was doing. The more interesting part was happening inside his mind. Dr. Kethril, the chief Zephyrian scientist, arrived at the monitoring station to study this unusual case. She was older than Veltar, with deeper scars on her gray skin and eyes that held the wisdom of many years. "Show me the recordings from the past week," she ordered. They watched Jake's daily routine in fast motion. Wake up, exercise, eat, sit quietly, walk, exercise again, eat, sit quietly, sleep. The pattern never changed. "What is he doing during those quiet periods?" Dr. Kethril asked. "We're not sure," Veltar admitted. "His brain activity is strange during those times, very active, but not in patterns we recognize." What Jake was actually doing would have amazed them if they could understand it. During his quiet periods, he was building entire worlds inside his mind. He had started by trying to remember every book he had ever read, word by word. This was harder than he expected, but as days passed, his memory seemed to get stronger. He would spend hours reconstructing novels in his head, playing out the stories like movies. When he finished with books, he moved on to movies and TV shows. He could remember dialogue almost perfectly, and his mind filled in the parts he couldn't recall. But Jake didn't stop there. He began creating new stories. He would imagine himself as different characters, living different lives. He created entire families and friendships in his mind, complete with conversations and adventures. The Zephyrians had made a serious mistake in their understanding of humans. Their species was telepathic. They shared thoughts and emotions constantly with each other. To them, being alone was like being cut off from life itself. They assumed all intelligent species would feel the same way, but humans were different. Human minds were built to work alone. For thousands of years, humans had spent time by themselves, hunting, traveling, thinking. Solitude wasn't torture for humans. It could be a gift. Jake discovered this gift as the weeks turned into months. Without any distractions from the outside world, his mind became sharper and clearer than it had ever been. He could focus on single thoughts for hours without getting bored. He could explore memories he had forgotten years ago. He remembered every person he had ever met. Not just their faces, but their voices, their mannerisms, the way they walked and talked. In his mind, he could have conversations with all of them. His parents, his sister, his friends from school, fellow soldiers. They all became real to him. Again, his vital signs are improving, Dr. Kethril noted, looking at the medical readings. His heart rate is lower and more steady than when he arrived. His blood pressure is perfect. He's even gained muscle mass despite the limited space. This was true. Jake's body was becoming more efficient. His exercises had made him stronger, in some ways than he had been as a free man. More importantly, his mind was becoming something extraordinary. Jake had always been smart, but now he was discovering abilities he never knew he had. He could solve complex math problems in his head, calculating huge numbers without paper or calculator. He found he could compose music, creating symphonies that played perfectly in his imagination. He even began to understand things about himself that he had never noticed before. He realized he had always been happiest when he was alone with his thoughts. The busy, noisy world outside had actually been keeping him from discovering what his mind could really do. The Zephyrians watched all of this with growing alarm. They had been so confident in their method. Isolation had broken every other species within weeks or months, but this human seemed to be getting stronger, not weaker. "We need to change our approach," Dr. Kethral said. "This isolation isn't working." "What do you suggest?" Veltar asked. "Perhaps we should try introducing stressors, small changes to his environment, temperature fluctuations, irregular feeding times, strange noises, something to disrupt his routine." Veltar nodded. "Yes, we'll start tomorrow." But Jake was ready for changes. His months of mental training had prepared him for anything. When they made his cell colder, he used breathing techniques to warm his body. When they delayed his meals, he practiced patience and gratitude for whatever food came. Each new challenge became another opportunity for Jake to prove to himself that he could adapt to anything. The Zephyrians were accidentally making him stronger. With every test they gave him, Jake had also figured out that he was being watched. He couldn't see the cameras, but he knew they were there. Sometimes he would look directly at the walls and smile, as if he was greeting old friends. This behavior disturbed his captors more than screaming would have. One day Jake did something that shocked the monitoring team. He began to speak out loud for the first time in months. "I know you're watching me," he said calmly, looking at one of the walls. "I want to thank you for this experience. I never knew what my mind was capable of until you gave me the chance to find out." Veltar and his team exchanged worried glances. This was not the behavior of a broken prisoner. Jake continued talking, as if he was having a conversation with friends. "I've learned so much about myself in here. Did you know that? Humans can remember almost everything that ever happened to them. We just don't usually have time to access those memories. You've given me that time." He began to pace slowly around his cell, still talking. "I've relived my entire childhood, day by day. I've had conversations with everyone I've ever loved. I've read entire libraries worth of books in my head. I've composed music and poetry. I've solved mathematical problems that used to seem impossible." The Zephyrians realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This human wasn't just surviving their torture, he was thriving because of it. "I've also figured out something about your species," Jake said, stopping to look directly at what he correctly guessed was a camera. "You're afraid of being alone because you're always connected to each other's minds. You can't imagine what it's like to be truly individual, but humans are individuals first. We're comfortable with ourselves." Dr. Kethral felt a chill run through her long body. The human was analyzing them as much as they were studying him. Jake's smile grew wider. "The funny thing is, I'm probably more free in here than I was out there. Out there I had duties, responsibilities, distractions. In here, I have infinite possibilities. My mind can go anywhere, be anything, experience everything." Veltar turned off the monitors. He couldn't watch anymore. For the first time in his career, he was beginning to understand that they might have made a terrible mistake. They hadn't captured a prisoner. They had created something far more dangerous, a human who had discovered the true power of his own mind. 1 year had passed since Jake Morrison first entered the White Cube. The Zephyrian Empire was having its first real crisis in decades, and it was all because of one human who refused to break. General Zurketh arrived at the prison facility in Dans Enciendorise, his massive warship. He was the highest commander in the Zephyrian military, a being so old and powerful that younger Zephyrians trembled when they saw him. His skin was darker gray than the others, marked with scars from 100 battles across the galaxy. Commander Veltar met him at the docking bay, his multiple eyes looking down at the floor in shame. "General, I can explain what has happened here." "You had better explain," Zurketh said in a voice like grinding metal. "Word of your failure is spreading through our entire fleet. Our soldiers are beginning to question whether our methods actually work." They walked together through the corridors of the prison ship. Around them, Zephyrian technicians and guards went about their duties, but Jake could feel their nervousness. Everyone knew that something had gone terribly wrong with the human. "Prisoner, show me," Zurketh commanded when they reached the monitoring room. On the screens, Jake was doing something that looked like a dance. He moved slowly and gracefully around his small cell, his movements flowing like water. His eyes were closed, and his face showed complete peace and concentration. "What is he doing?" Zurketh asked. "We believe it is some form of mental exercise," Dr. Kethral explained. "He has developed routines that seem to strengthen both his body and his mind. We have never seen anything like it." Jake's daily schedule had become incredibly complex over the months. He would wake up and begin with breathing exercises that seemed to put him into a trance-like state. Then came physical exercises that used every inch of his small space. He had learned to do things with his body that seemed impossible in such a confined area. But the most disturbing part was what happened when Jake sat still. For hours at a time, he would remain perfectly motionless, barely even breathing. His brain activity during these periods was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever recorded. It was as if his mind was operating on a completely different level. "His vital signs are perfect," Dr. Kethral continued. "Better than perfect, actually. His heart rate and blood pressure are lower than when he arrived, but his physical strength has increased. His reflexes have become faster. His memory appears to have improved dramatically." Jake had indeed become something extraordinary. The isolation that was supposed to destroy him had instead allowed him to discover abilities that most humans never knew they possessed. He could slow his heartbeat at will, control his body temperature, and enter states of consciousness that bordered on the mystical. During his meditation periods, Jake explored regions of his mind that he had never accessed before. He could remember being a small child with perfect clarity. He could recall conversations from 20 years ago, word for word. He had even begun to remember things that seemed impossible, like dreams he had forgotten or feelings from when he was too young to speak. But Jake had gone beyond just remembering. He had learned to create entirely new experiences in his mind. He could visit imaginary places that felt completely real. He could have conversations with people who existed only in his thoughts. He had built entire worlds inside his head, complete with their own histories and cultures. The Zephyrians found this terrifying because it went against everything they understood about intelligent life. In their society, minds were connected. Individual consciousness was weak and needed constant support from others. The idea that a single mind could be complete by itself was alien to them. "How is this possible?" Zurketh asked, studying the readings on the monitors. "We think we misunderstood human psychology," Dr. Kethral admitted. "Our telepathic nature makes us dependent on mental connections with others. We assumed all species would be the same, but humans appear to be different." This was the understatement of the century. Humans had evolved as individuals first and social creatures second. While they enjoyed company and relationships, their minds were fully capable of functioning alone. In fact, some humans did their best thinking in solitude. Jake had become the ultimate example of this human trait. Without any external distractions, his mind had expanded in ways that seemed almost supernatural. He could focus on single thoughts for hours without getting bored. He could solve complex problems by thinking about them from dozens of different angles. He had essentially become a master of his own consciousness. "We tried introducing stressors," Veltar reported. "Temperature changes, irregular feeding, strange sounds, nothing worked. He adapts to everything we do within hours." This was true. Every challenge the Zephyrians presented became another opportunity for Jake to grow stronger. When they made his cell hot, he learned to meditate in ways that cooled his body. When they made it cold, he developed breathing techniques that generated internal heat. When they played loud noises, he used them as background music for his mental exercises. Jake had also figured out the pattern of these tests. He knew his captors were trying to break his routine and drive him crazy. Instead of fighting the changes, he welcomed them as variety in his otherwise unchanging environment. "The most disturbing thing," Dr. Kethral continued, "is that he talks to us now, not begging or pleading, but as if he's having friendly conversations." On cue, Jake looked up at one of the hidden cameras and smiled. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. I hope you're all having a pleasant day. I've been thinking about your species and I have some interesting theories I'd like to share. Zurketh's eyes widened. The human was addressing them directly, calmly, as if he were greeting neighbors over a fence. Jake continued talking while he stretched his arms above his head. I think I understand why you use isolation as torture. Your minds are always connected to each other, so being alone feels like death to you. But human minds are different. We're built to be independent. The Zephyrians in the monitoring room shifted uncomfortably. The prisoner was analyzing them with the same clinical interest they had been using to study him. I've been alone for a year now, Jake said, beginning his morning exercises. And I've learned things about human potential that I never could have discovered in the outside world. Did you know that human memory is essentially unlimited? We just don't usually have time to access all of it. He moved into a complex series of stretches that he had developed over the months. I can remember every day of my life now, in perfect detail. Every conversation, every meal, every dream. It's like having a library of experiences that I can visit whenever I want. Dr. Kethrall was taking notes frantically. His claims about memory enhancement may actually be true. We've observed that his brain activity patterns have changed significantly over the past few months. Jake continued his monologue while he exercised. The funny thing is, I'm probably happier now than I've ever been. Out there in the world, I was always distracted by duties and responsibilities and other people's problems. In here, I have perfect freedom to explore the infinite possibilities of consciousness. Zurketh had heard enough. Turn off the monitors, he ordered. Sir? Veltar asked. I said turn them off, I don't want to hear anymore. The screens went dark, but the damage was already done. Everyone in the room had heard Jake's words, and they all understood the implications. The human wasn't just surviving their torture. He was becoming something beyond their understanding. What do we do now? Veltar asked quietly. Zurketh was silent for a long moment. In his centuries of life, he had never encountered a problem like this. The Zephyrian Empire's entire strategy for conquest was based on psychological warfare. They broke the spirits of enemy species and used that defeat to demoralize entire civilizations. But Jake Morrison represented something that challenged their basic understanding of how minds worked. If one human could do this, what did it say about the species as a whole? How could you conquer a race of beings who could turn any adversity into strength? We continue the isolation, Zurketh finally said. Perhaps after more time he will finally break. But even as he said it, the general knew it wasn't true. This human had already been alone for a year, and he was stronger than ever. If anything, more time would only make him more dangerous. For the first time in his long military career, General Zurketh began to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire might have encountered something they couldn't defeat. And that something was the simple, terrifying power of a human mind, left alone to discover its own potential. Jake Morrison continued his daily routine, unaware of the crisis he was causing in the alien command structure. In his white cube, surrounded by silence and emptiness, he had found something that his captors could never understand: true freedom. And with each passing day, he was becoming more free than any human had ever been before. 2.5 years had passed since Jake Morrison entered the white cube. The Zephyrian Empire was beginning to fracture, and all because of one human who refused to be broken. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Zephyrian soldiers were questioning orders. Other alien species had heard rumors about the human who survived isolation and were beginning to resist more fiercely. The Empire's reputation for invincibility was crumbling. In his monitoring room, Commander Veltar watched Jake with something approaching fear. The human had become something beyond their understanding. He moved with perfect grace and control, every gesture calculated and purposeful. His daily routines had evolved into something that looked almost like religious ceremonies. Jake would wake up exactly when his internal clock told him to. He no longer needed the artificial day and night cycle that the Zephyrians had originally programmed. His body had learned to regulate itself completely. He would begin each day with breathing exercises that seemed to put him into a state of perfect calm. Then came the physical training. Over the months, Jake had transformed his small cell into a complete gymnasium in his mind. He could do exercises that used every muscle in his body, despite having only a few square feet of space. His movements were fluid and controlled, like a master martial artist performing ancient forms. But the most frightening part was what Jake had become mentally. During his meditation periods, which now lasted for hours at a time, his brain showed activity patterns that the Zephyrians had never seen in any species. It was as if he had learned to access parts of his mind that were normally dormant. Dr. Kethrel had been studying Jake's brain scans for months. "Look at these readings," she said to her assistant. "His neural activity during meditation is unlike anything in our database. He's using parts of his brain that most humans never access." Jake had indeed discovered abilities that seemed impossible. He could slow his heart rate so much that he appeared to be dead, then return to normal consciousness instantly. He could raise or lower his body temperature at will. He had developed a form of mental discipline that gave him complete control over his physical functions. More disturbing was what Jake could do with his memory and imagination. He had learned to create experiences in his mind that were indistinguishable from reality. He could visit any place he had ever been, talk to any person he had ever met, and experience any situation he could imagine. His internal world had become vast and limitless. The Zephyrians made their first serious mistake when they decided to test Jake's new abilities. Feltar ordered his technicians to introduce more extreme stressors to the environment. They began changing the temperature rapidly, from freezing cold to burning hot. They played sounds that were designed to cause pain and confusion. They even tried flashing bright lights at random intervals. Jake adapted to each new challenge with frightening ease. When the temperature dropped, he would enter a meditation state that generated body heat. When it rose, he would breathe in ways that cooled his system. The painful sounds became background music for his exercises. The flashing lights became part of a complex mental game he played with himself. But worst of all, Jake began to treat each new test as a gift. "Thank you for the variety," he said to his hidden cameras one day after they had bombarded his cell with loud, screeching noises for hours. "I was getting a bit bored with the silence. This gives me new challenges to work with." He had learned to turn every form of torture into a form of training. Pain became an opportunity to practice mental control. Discomfort became a chance to strengthen his will. Chaos became raw material for his increasingly powerful mind to organize and understand. Dr. Kethrel made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian command structure. While analyzing Jake's behavior patterns, she realized that he was not just surviving the isolation. He was evolving. "His cognitive abilities are expanding beyond normal human parameters," she reported to General Zurketh. "His memory recall is now essentially perfect. His problem-solving skills have increased dramatically. His creative thinking appears to be unlimited." This was true. Jake had become something that human science had never imagined possible. His mind, freed from all external distractions and pressures, had grown in ways that seemed supernatural. He could perform mathematical calculations that would require computers. He could compose music of incredible complexity entirely in his head. He could create works of art and literature that existed only in his imagination, but were more beautiful than anything in the real world. Jake had also begun to understand things about the nature of consciousness itself. During his deepest meditation states, he explored questions that philosophers had wondered about for thousands of years. What was the relationship between mind and reality? How much of experience was created by perception? Could consciousness exist independently of physical reality? The answers he found would have terrified his captors if they could understand them. Jake was discovering that the human mind was capable of creating entire universes of experience. He was learning that consciousness was not limited by physical laws or external circumstances. He was becoming proof that a single human mind, when fully developed, was more powerful than any technology or weapon. "We need to end this experiment," Dr. Kethrel told General Zurketh during an emergency meeting. "This human is becoming dangerous in ways we never anticipated." "Dangerous how?" Zurketh asked. He's still locked in a small cell. He can't hurt anyone. That's exactly the problem, Dr. Kethral replied. He's proving that physical imprisonment means nothing if the mind is free. If other humans learn what he's accomplished, it could change everything. The Zephyrians were beginning to understand a terrible truth about human nature. They had assumed that humans were like every other species they had conquered, dependent on external validation and social connection. They thought isolation would destroy the human spirit. Instead, they had given Jake the greatest gift possible, complete freedom from external limitations. In their attempt to break him, they had allowed him to become what humans were truly capable of becoming, when all restrictions were removed. Jake himself was aware of his transformation. He could feel his mind growing stronger and more capable every day. He understood that he was becoming something that had never existed before, a human who had fully realized the potential of individual consciousness. "I want to thank you again," he said to his cameras one morning, 2 years and 8 months into his confinement. "You've given me the chance to discover what humans are really capable of. I've learned that we don't need anything external to be complete. We carry entire universes inside our minds." He paused in his stretching routine and looked directly at what he knew was the main monitoring camera. "I've also figured out something important about your species. You use isolation as torture because you can't imagine existence without mental connection to others. But humans are different. We're individuals first and social creatures second." Jake's smile was peaceful, but somehow terrifying to those watching. "The funny thing is, I'm probably more powerful now than I was when I had a spaceship and weapons. My mind has become something that can't be contained or controlled, and the knowledge I've gained can't be taken away." Dr. Kethral turned off the monitors. She couldn't listen anymore. The human was no longer just a prisoner. He had become a living symbol of everything the Zephyrian Empire couldn't understand or defeat. In the highest levels of the Zephyrian government, emergency meetings were being held. Military commanders were demanding answers. How could one human in a small cell become a threat to their entire way of life? The answer was simple, but horrifying to the Zephyrians. Jake Morrison had discovered the infinite power of human consciousness. He had proven that no external force could truly imprison a mind that refused to be limited. And if one human could do this, what did that mean for the entire human species? General Zurketh made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jake Morrison had to be released. Not because he had broken, but because keeping him any longer was too dangerous. They had created something they couldn't control, and the only solution was to let it go before it became even more powerful. But they all knew it was already too late. The damage was done. Jake Morrison had proven that humans were unconquerable in the most fundamental way possible, and that knowledge would spread throughout the galaxy like a virus, destroying the Zephyrian Empire's power forever. 3 years, 1,095 days. Jake Morrison knew the exact count because his mind had become a perfect timekeeper. He stood in the center of his white cube, dressed in the same simple gray clothing they had given him years ago. But everything else about him had changed. His body was lean and strong, shaped by 3 years of disciplined exercise in a tiny space. His movements were graceful and controlled, like a master dancer or martial artist. But the real changes were invisible. Inside his mind, where he had built something that would terrify his captors if they truly understood it. Jake looked up at the hidden camera he had located months ago and smiled. It was time. "I know you're watching," he said calmly. "I know you've been watching for 3 years now, trying to figure out what went wrong with your perfect system." In the monitoring room, General Zurketh, Commander Veltar, and Dr. Kethral watched in silence. They had been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since they realized that Jake was no longer just adapting to their torture. He had transcended it completely. "I want to explain something to you," Jake continued, his voice steady and peaceful. "You thought isolation would break me because you don't understand what humans really are. You see us as social creatures who need others to survive, like your own species. But that's only part of the truth." Jake began to pace slowly around his cell, his movements flowing like water. "Humans are individuals first. We can exist completely alone if we need to. More than that, we can thrive alone. You've given me 3 years to discover abilities that most humans never even know they have. The Zephyrians watching him felt something they had never experienced before. Pure existential terror. This human wasn't just unbroken. He had become something beyond their ability to comprehend or control. I can slow my heartbeat to almost nothing and then speed it up again, Jake said, demonstrating by visibly relaxing as his pulse dropped to barely detectable levels. I can control my body temperature, my pain response, my sleep patterns. I've learned to use parts of my brain that normally stay dormant. Dr. Kethrall looked at her instruments and confirmed what Jake was claiming. His vital signs were changing exactly as he described, with a level of control that should have been impossible. But the physical abilities are nothing compared to what I've discovered about human consciousness, Jake continued. I've learned that our minds are essentially unlimited. I can remember every moment of my life with perfect clarity. I can create entire worlds in my imagination that are as real as this cell. I can solve problems that would take your computers hours to figure out. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at the main camera. His smile was warm and genuine, but somehow it was the most frightening expression the Zephyrians had ever seen. The funny thing is, I should thank you. Before you captured me, I was just an ordinary soldier. I had no idea what I was truly capable of. You've given me the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover the infinite potential of human consciousness, General. Zerketh felt something break inside his mind. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered an enemy who thanked his captors for torturing him. I've also learned something important about your species, Jake said. You use isolation as torture because your minds are always connected to each other. Being alone feels like death to you. That's why you can't understand what you've done to me. Jake's voice became almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something to confused students. You've given me complete freedom. Freedom from distractions, from obligations, from the need to please others or meet their expectations. You've allowed me to become purely myself, without any external limitations. In the monitoring room, alarms began to sound. Other Zephyrian ships in the area were detecting massive energy readings from Jake's cell, but the instruments couldn't identify the source. The energy seemed to be coming from Jake himself. My mind has become something that can't be contained, Jake continued, seemingly unaware of the chaos he was causing in the alien systems. I've learned to exist in multiple states of consciousness simultaneously. I can experience past, present, and future as if they're all happening at once. I've touched something that you could never understand, the true nature of individual awareness. Dr. Kethrall's instruments were going crazy. Jake's brain activity was off the charts, showing patterns that violated everything they knew about neurological function. It was as if his mind was operating on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The most beautiful part, Jake said, his smile growing wider, is that this knowledge can't be taken away. Even if you kill me now, I've proven what humans are capable of, and other humans will learn from my example. This was the moment that General Zerketh realized they had lost. Not just this battle, but the entire war. Jake Morrison had become living proof that the Zephyrian Empire's methods were not just ineffective against humans, they were counterproductive. Every human they tried to break this way would only become stronger. I've spent 3 years exploring the infinite space inside a single human mind. Jake continued. I've discovered that consciousness is more powerful than any weapon, more durable than any material, more creative than any technology. You've accidentally created something that your empire can never defeat. The alarms in the monitoring room were getting louder. Systems throughout the ship were malfunctioning in ways that made no scientific sense. It was as if Jake's transformed. Consciousness was affecting reality around him. General Zerketh made the hardest decision of his military career. Release him, he ordered. Sir? Commander Veltar asked, not believing what he had heard. I said release him, now, before this gets any worse. But the isolation protocol isn't complete. He hasn't broken yet. He's never going to break, Zerketh said quietly. We've created something we can't control. The only solution is to let it go before it destroys us. Dr. Kethrall understood immediately. If we keep him much longer, he might evolve beyond our ability to contain him physically. His consciousness is already operating on levels we can't measure. The order was given. For the first time in 3 years, the door to Jake's white cube began to open. Jake stood calmly as the wall slid aside, revealing the corridor beyond. Bright lights and strange colors flooded into his cell after years of perfect white emptiness. But Jake's eyes didn't need time to adjust. His senses had become so refined that he could instantly process any amount of stimulation. 3 Zephyrian guards waited in the corridor, their weapons ready but their hands shaking. They had heard the stories about what this human had become. Jake looked at them with genuine compassion. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not angry with any of you. You've given me exactly what I needed, even though you didn't mean to." Jake walked out of his cell with perfect confidence. His movements were so graceful and controlled that the guards stepped back automatically. This wasn't the same human they had captured 3 years ago. This was something new and unprecedented. As Jake walked through the corridors of the alien ship, Zephyrian crew members stopped their work to stare at him. He moved like he owned the ship, like he was a visiting dignitary rather than a released prisoner. His presence seemed to fill the entire vessel with a strange, powerful energy. When they reached the docking bay where his old scout ship was waiting, Jake turned to address the Zephyrians who had gathered to watch his release. "I want you to remember this moment," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the large space. "You tried to break a human spirit through isolation and torture. Instead, you allowed that spirit to discover its true power. This is what humans become when you remove all limitations. We become infinite." Jake climbed into his repaired ship and started the engines. As he prepared to leave, he sent one final message to the Zephyrian command. "Tell your empire that humans cannot be conquered through fear or pain or isolation. We turn every challenge into strength, every prison into a school, every torture into a gift. We are not just survivors. We are evolution itself." His ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying Jake Morrison back toward Earth. But he was no longer the same man who had left. He was the first of a new kind of human, one who had discovered the infinite potential that lay dormant in every member of his species. The Zephyrian Empire began its retreat from human space that very day. Word spread quickly through their forces about the human who had thanked his captors for 3 years of torture. Morale collapsed. Soldiers refused orders. The entire structure of psychological warfare that had built their empire crumbled in the face of one simple truth. Humans were unconquerable because they carried infinity within themselves, and Jake Morrison had proven it.